سعادة الدكتور غازي العباسي الأمين العام لهيئة المهندسين السعوديين. والدكتور غازي هو أحد أساتذة كلية العمارة والتخطيط بجامعة الملك سعود، وأستاذ العمارة والتخطيط في الجامعة، وهو الآن أمين للهيئة السعودية للمهندسين. أدعوه لإدارة هذه الجلسة والتعريف بالمحاضرين وبإدارة الجلسة، فليتفضل.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. بداية أشكر الجمعية السعودية لعلوم العمران على عملها لهذا الملتقى، وحقيقة أنه القطاع الصحي يحتاج مننا إلى لفتة بسيطة، وأنا أعتقد أنهم وضعوا يدهم على أول الطريق، وأيضا على تأسيس هذه الشعبة التي تهتم بتصميم المنشآت الصحية. First of all, I would thank all the lecturers coming with me, and I understand that the time is shortage. People are waiting for lunch, so I will try to squeeze the time, accelerate this lecture. So I would call the first lecturer to start to present his paper, the architect Henning Lons. He is an architect in he is an architect in by AKG UIA, a Public Health Group BBR. Please start to present your paper. Actually, his lecture is talking about the hospital building and planning standards. Floor for you.
Thank you very much.
We'll squeeze the time 5 minutes less, so it would be 15 minutes. If you could.
Okay. It is a very big honor for me to be here today, and I am very happy to be able to have joined already the previous speeches, and I would like to refer to the very wonderful speech about NICU and about the reference made to hospital standards, planning standards, and improvement of such. And I would also like to refer to the speech in the beginning about the new projects here in the kingdom, especially for prototype projects. Prototype projects means, of course, that you need in the beginning, of course, to establish already a program for all the buildings. The speech today I would like to give is a little bit about planning standards and our experience with it. The agenda. I would like to start with a short comparison of AIA, the American standards, the NHS, and the DIN. I'm very happy that Mr. Hinson already spoke about the German way how to implement the DIN, so I can try to make my speech shorter by the 5 minutes. I would like to follow then by case studies. We have planned in the Middle East projects according to AIA, but we have learned that this design is not acceptable in a couple of parts with or for NHS. I would like to continue with a case study about a third-party review according to AIA. And then I would like to have a few words with you about accreditation and planning standards, especially in the Middle East, the word JCI, and what is the impact on planning standards. Then I would like to present the Abu Dhabi standards, and point number 6 is I would like to discuss with you what is the outlook for standards and accreditation and harmonization of standards, what is our recommendation. I would like to start with you now about what is the standard operations theatre size. I know that every professional would now say, hey, talk to the end user, we need to define the standard, talk to the doctor. What do you do if there is no end user? So then the question is, do you follow the American standards, the British or the German standards? So what do we learn? Important is in the beginning we have to define who will be the future operator or what kind of operational policy will be in place. I was part in the Middle East of project where there is a switch of operators from British to American, I don't know, to German. And every operator would like to apply other standards. You see here in that graphic already, or in that overview, there are so many standards to so many operation theaters. What is the minimum clear door opening in the patient room? A very easy question, but so many answers. We all know we have to push through a bed. The beds will increase our inpatient will increase in terms of size, the bed will increase. However, there are so many numbers. I don't want to say that we have to come out only with one number. I'm only referring to the confusion, especially when you have to follow a project in a country applying a standard like AIA or NHS or a German standard. Look here, we're having from 1.12 meter to recommendation to 1.30 structure opening and so on. We do not want to end up in a hospital like this. This is, of course, it is not a real hospital. It shows only if there is a confusion of standards, if standards will be too much, and people look only into standards, especially for engineering and for life and safety, then a hospital corridor could look like this. So we have to be reasonable with standards. We all know as architecture professionals in the beginning of a project, we need to implement the workflow. We need to implement, everything to provide the ideal workplace for staff, for doctors and for nurses. And if possible, we would like to have standards applying to it, resulting in such a floor plan where we can say this is applying to international standards, but is it applying to American, British or German? But this is what we as planners need. We need also, and this was also explained today by the other speeches, standards and regulations or the guidelines, not only for the standard acute care hospital, we need it for the core hospital, for home for elderly, for all the facilities you see here on that graphic. Now I would like to start to compare the standards. NHS is already a very long standard which is used in the UK. If you have a question, let's say for a specific part of a hospital, for a specific size or load, you go to NHS and you will find really good answers. I'm very much impressed. In Germany, as Mr. Hinsen has already explained today, we do not have every standard as the AIA or the NHS, but we have other standards that can apply, especially for the beginning of projects, which can develop the target planning in the room and space. We do have the American standards, is already also an old standard that is going to 1947, and of course we have also the Australian standards that are applying now more or less in the Emirate of Abu Dhabi. What we all have to learn is, if people ask for international standards, there is not that international standards, and we also have to learn that every country regulation have regulation in place, which maybe the other regulation will not show that much into detail. It is very complicated, for example, if a client asks a German operator in the Middle East to apply for German standards and then having American planning regulations in place, which might not, especially for operations theaters and others, implement how a German operator would do the operation. We have, in addition, and this is very important, in addition to this general overview, we have a lot of the national insurance regulations. For example, here, this is a German regulation to protect staff. Because we are talking about staff, we are talking about doctors and nurses spending nearly their whole life working and providing care in a hospital. For example, in this national insurance regulation, there are very much in detail space requirements for operation theaters and others. But these regulations are normally only available in German, and therefore we are not able really to, to apply these standards in international projects. What we can do is to translate these standards, for example, in one of the tasks we always like to enjoy to discuss staff changing rooms. You know what I'm talking about? You have a project here and you discuss with the client how many staff changing rooms should be inside. We do have regulation or we do have numbers to implement, but it must apply to the local conditions. These are only pictures showing what we have done here to implement these regulations. What we learned in Germany, as explained by Mr. Hinsen, I will not repeat it. We have it, especially for the target planning. It's the DIN standard that was explained in the morning. I will go through. These standards we are using for projects in the Middle East to develop it, what Mr. Hinson showed in the German projects in the Middle East, to have a target plan, to further develop that target plan, because this German DIN regulation for space planning is flexible and is quite well used for this kind of starting with a master plan and going from there into the schedule of accommodation. This is a project we did with a German operator in the Emirate of Abu Dhabi, where we could apply this standard in a particular, in a special situation for a rehabilitation hospital in the Middle East. Of course, as you see, we are trying also to implement a lot of greenery and light, of course. This is translated, as you see here, into a room and space program, following the German way, how you split it up into the departments and functional spaces. The NHS, for example, gives you much more detail. I would like to give you one short example about operation theatres. Looking into the NHS and looking into layout examples. Of course, this is not what you need to implement, but they are showing to you really how the workflow and everything should work in an NHS designed or in a hospital that is in accordance with NHS regulation. The NHS is not only providing the layouts, they are talking about relationship, about calculation of everything. So it's very much in deep, and I really like to use these standards. The comparison now is the AIA. I have you here only a kind of short abstract. If you look now into the AIA, you find nearly about every part of a hospital, you find a very good explanation, you find standards that you can use. In comparison with the NHS, you do not find graphical or you do not find examples for the layout. So you really need to read. And if you have already worked with the AIA, you don't have to read only one page or one chapter. You really need to review nearly the whole AIA in order to understand how it is structured and how to use it for your project. For example, I'll give you only a few examples. Clean rooms, for example, here in the 2.2 specific requirements for general hospitals. But you will find, of course, clean rooms, clean workrooms also in operations theatre departments. So you need to really to be very careful to read the right chapter. This is, for example, the AIA requirement for cath lab. Of course, I have not everything here. Now I would like to start with the first case study we had here in the Middle East. There was a project planned by an American architect where the operator or the side of the client changed and requested it should apply to NHS standards. Of course, for me as a German, it was a little bit interesting now, because first I needed to understand the AIA and then the NHS regulation. However, this was the actual previous layout. This was our redesign in accordance to our third-party review, more or less in accordance to AIA in German planning regulations. This was reviewed then according to NHS requirements. And the thing we learned, and this is important and should make us a little bit careful how to use standards. We learned that a US-designed cath lab and even operation theatres does not necessarily fulfill the UK standards. And there are a few very strict UK requirements, as you can see here. For example, in the US is, for example, not there is a dirty utility room not required to be adjacent to the cath lab. In the UK, in the NHS standard, you need to have it adjacent. I don't want to go through every little detail. More or less, we had to redesign the whole department again. We had to again go into the cath lab area, and you see here now how many changes or how many relationships must be fulfilled, in particular to fulfill the NHS requirements, even though the previous design was 95% in line with American AIA. I don't want to go through every point here, but if you really go in deep through the comparison of operations theatres according to AIA and NHS, what we did, then you learn that there are so many things where the AIA is more flexible and where the NHS is more strict. So the clear answer is there is, in my opinion, no clear standard at the moment where you can say, use this standard and the hospital operator XYZ will be able to run. So it will lead to the point at the end where I will come out with a clear statement, what is our recommendation. But there are so many points where NHS, you see here the graphic, is extremely strict, and where AIA is more flexible to implement it in another way. However, the AIA, as I said, will not give you any graphical or any layout example, but the NHS does. The third point number 3 is our case study. We had an operations theater extension project in the Middle East according to AIA, and we have been reviewed by a third-party review. I think all of you know this is normal standard now here. There is a third party reviewing again your design if it is in line with an international standard. And we did everything, and you see here the graphic to compare, is it in line with AIA or not, and everything was fulfilling AIA standards. The post-anesthesia care unit from operations here to the ICU units. We received a very long list of critical questions about our design, and the reason why I want to show this to you is that we need to be very careful using standards in the right way. For example, the AIA says that patient rooms must have exterior windows, right? This is shown here very clearly, but it's not applying to intensive care rooms. So we need to be very specific, and people who are reviewing design need to be very careful to understand the design and also understanding what is really written and stated in the AIA, because we got the feedback a suboptimal layout with, as you can read, with a lot of problems, with a kind of recommendation to redesign. But we needed to tell them, hey, this is an intensive care unit, this is a renovation project. In an intensive care unit, in a renovation project, you are allowed, this is here the actual layout, and this is written here, to have a window-to-window contact to the daylight. So these are small examples showing you that there is confusion with standards, confusion with requirements, where I feel as a professional that we need to, I don't think we can come to an international standard, but we need to learn that the standards are not the same, and we need to pay respect to the standards, not to use them wrongly. The same was, we got the feedback that our operations theaters have been not fulfilling the standards for the sterile goods, but this was done because of a mistake of the wrong interpretation, because the new principle of operations theaters does not need anymore these kind of storerooms attached to the operations theaters. This is referring to the point that we need to improve, we need to develop design, and we need, and I come to the last point, what I would like to show to you, which is very important for me. We need to understand that every project in the beginning needs to pay respect to the local conditions. We need to, in the beginning, to understand what is the operation policy. And we need to understand, and therefore I love this speech about the NICU, that we are only planners, but we need to sit together, we need to get the feedback from the end user, from the staff, and from the doctors to improve further design, because the processes are improving, and we are talking about evidence-based design, which was part of the first lecture today. Standards are good, but standards are, in my opinion, only good for the beginning. If there is a prototype or there are no end users in place, we need to sit and learn again to try further to improve the design, try to make examples on site, try to integrate the end user, and try to come out with the best design which we could achieve. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Henning, for appreciating the time and be more standard with the time of the panel. And actually, it encouraged us that we should have our own Saudi standard, since we have 3 different standards, and it works all of them. So I encourage this conference to come up with the result of that. We have to encourage our code to be one of the outcome of this one. The second speakers, okay, Mr. Jim Atkinson. He is the HDR Senior Healthcare, and Mr. Mohammed Ayub. He is a planner for HDR Design Principle. Would you please go to the panel? Their lecture will be designing healthcare facilities that adapt the state-of-the-art solution.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for having this first annual conference in healthcare design. What we're going to look at is the concept of designing in a cultural context. We've already done the introductions. I'm Mohammed Ayub, I'm the design principal out of HDR New York City. And I have Jim Atkinson here, who's Director of Healthcare Design and Planning with us. And within the kingdom, we're currently overseeing the design and implementation of King Faisal Medical City, Prince Mohammed Medical City, and King Saud Medical City. Healthcare expertise overseas. And I think this is actually a good bridging point to the first lecture here done by Henning there. What happened is that in the last 15 years, there's been a concurrent movement across the Middle East to bring in brand names of healthcare operators into the region. Previously, what it was is that these facilities were almost referral facilities rather than actually operational facilities. Only in the last 5 years has the move happened to actually think about creating operational facilities where you bring the expertise to the region. So that's what we said. It can't be just a name. It has to be beyond that. You need to have an implementation of operations. But to do that, what is a world-class brand? You know, when you refer to the American Journal of Medical Quality, you have to do things exceptionally well. But again, what does that mean? You have the American system, the British system, the German system, and then you have to throw it in a mix of applying evidence-based design in the facilities, and of course, the state-of-the-art, you design your facilities to be future adaptive and technologically sensitive or receptive. And of course, to do all those things, you have to employ some of the best hospital facilitators, and you have to attract them. And with caregivers in the family, and as this morning happened when Steve Go was talking about, you have to create, based on evidence-based design and looking at the trends, how do you create an environment that's ambient to the families and the caregivers? So to do all those things, you know, you look at the design in healthcare, well, the lean process and lean thinking.
That's right, looking at the design of the flow of the patients, the families, the clinicians, the supplies, information, all the equipment. It's looking at all those processes, and it's looking at trying to reduce the waste. As Steve mentioned earlier, it's removing all the non-value added steps. So sometimes it's saving space, sometimes it's improving a process, but it's always looking at eliminating those wastes. And also simplifying the work environment. Improving the quality, efficiency, the safety, and also bringing the supplies to the point of use. And also allowing the caregiver to have visual control over the process as well as the patients, and enabling standardized spaces, standardized workflows, and looking at doing things in batch. So there's 12 factors of healing environments. I'm not going to go through all of them. I'll just mention wayfinding. Wayfinding is critical when you have distraught family members coming to a facility, not knowing where they're going. It needs to be intuitive. They need to know where the front door is. When you have people coming to the emergency room, it needs to be very clear and very directional. Also looking at single patient rooms by reducing the stresses on the family members and reducing the noise, and looking at bringing light and nature into the spaces that we normally don't see them. Because it reduces the stress on the patient, also reduces their length of stay, as well as medications and for pain. Now, Steve went through the evidence-based design process, so I'll skip over that. So
a lot of the times when we do our visioning sessions, we always hear, like yesterday, we want our facility to be memorable, a landmark, beyond five-star hospitality, move away from a hospital feel. But what does that all mean? And how does that all entail? What does it really, really mean for everybody? And hospitality is a term that's used a lot, and they assume that the magic bullet is in the design process. But the design actually creates a facility because the hospitality is going to be driven by operational throughput. But at the same time, we have to look at what are the other elements that are the intangibles. Earlier on this morning, we talked about evidence-based design, but the intangibles are the things that haven't been measured yet. The sense of smell and all the sensory aspects of it. What makes you feel at home? So from those things, looking into the region, focusing between the Cleveland Clinic and what we've done here at King Faisal Medical City, we looked at even the notion within the prayer rooms. Everybody always says we need prayer rooms, but as often, and here, when we just broke for prayer earlier today, you found the facility here doesn't even align itself to where the Mecca is. So we speak of these things, but they haven't been implemented. So if we design the spaces correctly, then they function. Their functional aspects are the product of the vision. So we looked at about creating like ease of access prayer rooms with an ease of access ablution room for wudu. So not everybody has to queue outside the bathrooms with their hand and feet into sinks, but things which are, what would be otherwise common sense or obvious, but they get overlooked in the grand, let's say, scheme of designing a healthcare facility. Other aspects within a hospital, and Jim is going to go into the patient room in a moment, is you're looking at the footwall. Here, the vision we had for the footwall, and this is the one at Arzana Hospital, is that we had basically a under-counter refrigerator, but also a warming tray. So family could bring food that the patient, and then can keep it in a warming station. Simple, measurable things, or unmeasurable things, but have great value to improve their, let's say, experience within the facility.
Looking at patient-focused care and moving away from the institution and looking at hospitality, as Mohammed mentioned. Looking at the grander spaces, you'll see that right here, this does not look institutional.
This is actually the lobby design that's under construction at the moment in Abu Dhabi for Cleveland Clinic. This is very much based on a concierge hoteling system. So you arrive at that moment, it's already, there's a sense of it's almost taking the red coats, what we call the red coats at the Cleveland Clinic, Ohio, and you have basically a concierge part that can help you, enable you to go to places. If we are going to quickly look at the Cleveland Clinic in Abu Dhabi, the building organizational blocks, and this is going to be very fast, obviously the tower design has been, or the whole hospital has been designed a continuum of care. So you have the patient tower that sits upon a swing wing, which is the administration parts and offices that can be adapted for future patient rooms. You have the clinics, and flanking from that also, and above it is the ICU, which is right beneath the typical patient floor, and the diagnostic treatment block, which is the heart of the hospital itself. And then there is a common gallery, what we call the Galleria, or the gallery, that has all the public spaces between cafes. It's really more of a mall-like feeling rather than a hospital. But all these things, as Jim alluded to earlier in evidence-based design, requires wayfinding. So we broke it into three simple wayfinding aspects. The public part was called the souk, which is where the mall is. Then perpendicular to that was the waha, that links the clinic to the diagnostic treatment block. And then you basically have the divide, the wadi between the clinic and the diagnostic treatment block. This is basically when you're in between waiting for family at the D&T side of things. This simple organization, and it really is, the premise behind it is about the continuum of care, allowed us to create these arteries that what you're seeing here is the initial concept of the vision, and the implementation of the right image and the bottom image are the implementation of the design concept. It definitely moves away from an institutional feel and more into hospitality or a shopping experience. And the waha part that bridges between the clinic and the diagnostic treatment block again, it's a step further into like more privacy, but still aimable, and the experiences. And even the family zones, you had seating that had kind of enclosed areas. Rather than having big screens, they almost are kind of like oysters that can cluster families together. And the wadi, which is the separation between the clinic and the diagnostic treatment block itself, that runs in parallel with them.
Now, as Mohammed mentioned earlier, we talked about the continuum of care. I know we're trying to do this really quickly, but just to explain what the continuum of care is, it's to allow as the patients walk in, they may go to the clinic, they'll have a clinic visit, and then how they continue on through into the inpatient environment, or coming in through the ED. There's a continuous flow of patients and ease for them to flow. So I'm going to go up to the bed floor, and we're looking at, this is a family-centered care model. And what's special about this is that in our family waiting areas, we have, of course, gender segregation, but we introduced the tea room to make sure that there was always tea available, and also the fact that each floor had its own designated and properly oriented prayer rooms. Also, the way we set this up so that we could bring, I forget whose presentation it was earlier, but the on-stage, off-stage mentality of bringing supplies up on the floor. We had segregated elevators to bring supplies up on the floor, and they moved in their own corridor system. So they were able to access the clean the soil, the nourishment rooms, and so that they never came into the environment of the patient. Patients never saw the supplies. It was a Disney-esque approach. They knew that they got there, the caregivers are able to get to them quickly. And we also looked at creating some other spots for the caregivers. Next slide. Within the patient room, we zoned it so that there was a definite nurse zone, the family zone, as well as the patient zone. And we looked at also bringing supplies to the bedside by creating nurse servers. This is the footwall for Cleveland Clinic Abu Dhabi. And you'll see that this also, we introduced the warming cabinets as well as the under-counter refrigerator for the family, but also a roll-out desk that could be brought out and unfolded and be made into a dining table for the families. I think on this particular slide, you'll start seeing how we tried to make it as hospitality as possible, so that in times that you don't need the gases or the equipment, they can be hidden, or they can be exposed when in need.
This is actually what we saw before was a vision in the rendering when we were looking at the concept and the design. But now this is actually the implementation of the actual design. So this is as of 3 months ago when we were on site and we were walking through photographing the facility.
And what you see here is one of the drawers pulled out, and that's a safe that you could put a laptop, it's a laptop size, or any of your personals, much like you see in hotels. This is an acute care bathroom. This is the patient bathroom. We were able to integrate the grab bars and make them appear to be more like towel bars, and we have a long, more linear type of basin.
One of the beauties of designing facilities in the Middle East is that the requirement in certain facilities is the royal suites. I mean, this is definitely a cultural context aspect of things. So within that, we had to basically even look at the security aspects of it, especially if the royal members were official government dignitaries. So we looked at from the way we planned the site, the parking, how you can actually break down and close a zone off the parking, that you can have the royals arriving, pulling up, but it doesn't affect the rest of the operational throughput of the hospital itself. There were dedicated elevators that will go straight to the royal floor, and then from that point, you arrive at another level of security, which is above. So based on the actual platform of the 36-bed unit, the royal floor has 4 royal suites. But within the 4 royal suites, again, before you get to them, there's still points of security zones. So you're off the elevator, there's a security point. At the Majlis area, security point, then another security point at the actual suite itself. And then even from that, you can see from the diagram, you begin to see how there's so much, there's like a public aspect and a more private aspect.
1 minute, please.
Okay, we're going to go through this one because within the royal design, actually, one of the difficulties is actually reconciling the medical staff with the protocol officer. This was something that we had to work through. We spent several hundred hours of user meetings to get everybody to understand the role of the protocol officer. And then it was agreed that the protocol officer will still be the in-between between the medical team and the royal, but in case of emergency, they can have access to the royal. Because we do have 1 more minute, so shall we just go to the morgue?
Let's go to the detail. Okay, yeah. Let's go to the morgue.
No, actually, let's go to the... Well, we'll keep it there. So the way it was designed, we focused, it's almost like a dart show. The royal patient is in the middle, flanked by a family majlis, a consort majlis, and a public majlis, all surround and around the patient room. And that seemed to have worked really well in a sense of separation from a cultural aspect as well as from a security aspect. Again, the finishes are to the same standard, but actually the finish intentions to higher standard, but the same concept of hospitality between the headboard and the footwall. And the D&T clinics, I think we're going to have to go.
I think we'll have to go. This is about modularity and flexibility, about learning to plan, and also being able to expand the facility in the future. It's always looking to the future so that we can expand and without disrupting any of the current operations. Let's go to the...
And just because you do that, it doesn't mean you cannot have a hospitality-driven design. Based on the same module, you can still have public waiting areas, private waiting areas, women's waiting rooms before you enter the clinics themselves. This is actually the Heart Specialty Center at the King Faisal Medical City in Abha. And last but not least is the morgue design. Another cultural difference in designing a morgue in a hospital in the United States and in the Middle East. Here you have the notion of the separation of the bodies, the preparation of the bodies for wrapping, and how do you take it to the body wrap, the charcoal room where you had the bodies can be prepared. This is in Cleveland Clinic, so many times they actually say the body will be wrapped and prepared to Islamic rituals within the facility if they're not locals to be taken. And the sense of dignity even for the body, even after, let's say, after life, as well as the family who will come and collect the body, having a private carport that can come in, collect the body, and leave. But to do all those things, to actually really, and this is 1 more minute, we wanted to really touch on the standardization and high-end finishes, because everybody sees those things and they think, wow, there's a budget, there is, these are all expensive systems, but in reality, it's to do with planning it correctly. Building on the automobile industry, the actual bathrooms themselves were designed, and between what we've been doing in Parkland Hospital, Texas, I believe Humber's going to follow through in Canada, Cleveland Clinic in Abu Dhabi was done it this way, and inshallah, and King Faisal will follow suit, is the mass production and standardization of pods for the bathrooms. So you can have high-end finishes done in a basically well-lit, controlled area, so you can improve quality of construction, and then you literally bring them on site, you crate them, you bring them on site, you plug them in, and you wire up your plumbing. This is the design of the VIP suite. You see that that's the bathroom enclosed, and this is the actual bathroom when the doors are open. And again, cultural aspect is not remote to the Middle East only. This is in Sharjah, in Amman, but also you begin to see it in Korea.
Excuse me.
They have certain cultural aspects, but we're finishing. And you have to look at between Korea, even when you design around the world, it's going to be driven by all those cultural aspects between Korea, Singapore, and of course China. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jim and Mr. Muhammad, for your lovely lecture that softened the word of hospital into hospitality, and this will encourage all architects to have this thought. Now the third speaker, Mr. Waring, he is the Vice President and the Principal with the KGWW Engineering Consultant. We'll talk about the current engineering trends in the standard healthcare design.
Okay, thanks very much. Now I really have to hurry. That's okay. Thank you very much for being patient with the electronics. I've been doing this long enough that I used to do this with boards and it was much easier. They're a lot harder to carry around, but they don't break. Okay, so everybody wants sustainability. Everybody wants their buildings to be sustainable, but we see there's a vast difference in what people do to define it. So I'm very briefly going to try to define sustainability and how sustainability relates to healthcare and projects and so forth, and some of the basics that go wrong. What's the definition of sustainability? The definition of sustainability in the dictionary is elimination of, I don't want to renew that now. Elimination of negative environmental impact through skillful, sensitive design. What's that mean to a hospital? Basically, efficient use of resources, or basically don't waste things. Hospitals are complex, very complex buildings and so forth. Comfort, security, safety, economical, but maintainable, very, very important. So they're very important buildings and so forth to build, and in addition to being sustainable. So how do we go about doing that? Start about with the basics. The significance of the building systems, and I'm an engineer, not an architect. Steve's an architect, he's going to talk about architecture in a minute, but an engineer and engineering systems. And when people think about sustainability, they think about energy, and energy is very important. But all the engineering systems, HVAC, plumbing, medical gases, fire protection, electrical, technology, or IT systems and so forth are all part of the building. They make up 45% of the cost of the construction of a new building, maybe up to 65% of a renovation. So they're very, very important systems to consider for sustainability. Okay? What are the driving factors on a sustainable hospital? Operating costs? Absolutely. Availability of water. Everywhere in the world, but especially here, it's very important that we talk about water and water conservation, and also pollution, and what are we doing with minimizing pollution to the environment if we're going to be sustainable. So research some engineering ideas and go back to the basics. People were sustainable 4,000 years ago. They didn't have all the facilities we have and so forth, so let's see what we can learn from them. First of all, the efficient use of light. Efficient use of light and natural light. We've lit a building in here, but we're not using any natural lights. How do we use natural light and use the solar energy for the building? Learning from water. The best use of water and so forth. We need it for irrigation, of course, obviously we need it for sustaining the building. It's a unique idea, but before people had heating systems and so forth, how did they use the natural mass of the earth and so forth to be able to heat and cool themselves? One of the ways was in caves. And one of my favorite subjects, and so people say, you're a hospital designer, what's that have to do with an Australian termite mound? Okay? It's interesting that termites for years have been able to keep their eggs at 24 degrees C continuously in all different kinds of conditions. And it's very hard for a mechanical engineer to do that with electricity and heating and cooling. So taking some of the basic ideas and so forth that have been around for centuries and applying those practically to a new hospital facility and so forth, we're trying to do that. Alternative heating and cooling. This is a graphical depiction of Sherman Hospital in Elgin, Illinois, a project that we designed, so forth, arguably one of the most energy efficient hospitals in the world. All right? Uses a 6-hectare lake, 4.5 meters deep, with approximately 250 kilometers of piping at the bottom of the lake. It's using natural ventilation, cooling, so forth, but also the Earth's mass to be able to heat and cool the building. Saves about 37% energy over another facility of this size with conventional high-efficiency systems. So it's a good application of a geothermal and geo-exchange system and using natural systems that we were described previously. Natural ventilation, chimney effect, another thing that was used by the termites. Okay, this is showing a project at Weber Center in the U.S. that uses natural ventilation many times of the year and so forth, uses natural chimney effect to the building to be able to heat and cool it. Thermal mass, a big issue in buildings, the thermal mass and using the thermal mass as a value and how the building's mass and so forth weighs into how it's built. Fortunately, in this part of the world, concrete is a building material. Concrete has a lot of mass. So something used wisely can be one of our good sustainable materials. Displacement air ventilation. Displacement air ventilation basically means putting the ventilation air where people breathe and where the loads are, and doing it smartly and bringing it into facilities. Not so appropriate for a patient room, but really appropriate for areas like laboratories, things that have office spaces in hospitals, loads, in big assembly areas. It's a very good application and a tremendous energy saver, saving a lot on electrical horsepower. Alternate cooling, something we stole from the Romans and their aqueducts. Idea of bringing in their domestic water to the buildings, so forth, something they needed to use for water use, but using the water and its cooling effect to be able to cool their buildings and so forth, running it through the floors. We do that now with chilled beams. A new system that brings chilled water, engineering controlled chilled water into a building and uses the natural chilled water and recirculation and convection of for patient rooms and so forth, something that is just becoming about now, saves a tremendous amount of energy in a patient room. Something has just recently come about being used there. Okay? Supplemental heating recovery. Ancient Roman baths do the same thing. Heat the bath, take a bath, but also use that same water and so forth, that waste energy to heat the buildings. We do that with heat recovery chillers. We put a chiller in, make chilled water to cool the building, but use heat recovery for the reheat that's required for any hospital, no matter where in the world it is. In sustainable options, obviously, rainwater harvesting and things that are very, very important, especially using wastewater like building condensate and any kind of water you can capture and so forth for things like irrigation. I mean, everything here has to be irrigated. And renewable energy and photovoltaics. Big subject now. A big subject because you have a lot of sun. And using things like every one of the parking structures you have around here are covered. Instead of covering it with a roof, covering it with photovoltaic cells and so forth and be able to get the value of the energy. This particular building we're showing here uses about 25% of its energy comes from photovoltaics. Finally, zoning and how we zone a building and make sure the building is zoned correctly so that we make the best use and so forth of the systems and how they operate. A couple of things in the planning of a building that people very rarely think about, but this is something that's important to understand, that two things that really affect the energy consumption of a building are its size and its occupancy type. If you look at this is a chart showing building energy consumption, annual energy consumption in 1,000 BTUs per square meter. And the different size buildings, the smaller the building, on average, the less energy that it uses. So what that tells us, we have a preconceived notion. Buildings, hospital, healthcare facilities in this part of the world are huge. 250,000 square meter hospital. Those are not built very many places, especially at one time. But anything that we can take out of that hospital doesn't have to be required to be a hospital facility, and a smaller facility will make it more sustainable there and consume less energy. A bigger challenge is the occupancy type. We'd really like to take a facility and we'd like to put everything in what we call an I, or an institutional occupancy. Look at the difference what an institutional occupancy consumes as energy annually versus an outpatient facility basically providing the same type of care. Now certainly you cannot put a surgery, an ER, a NICU and so forth, or anything like that in a B occupancy building, but an outpatient facility, cancer care, doctor's offices, things like that, can be in an outpatient facility and consume just about the same amount of energy that education, mercantile assembly buildings do. So a smart use of planning of the building size and the occupancy type are some things that can do a lot for sustainability without having to do anything else. Okay? What are our design resources? Design resources are basically whatever design resource you need for making sure the hospital works correctly. The FGI guidelines I'm showing here, but it could be other resources. There are advanced energy design guidelines designed by ASHRAE that gives prescriptive methods for being able to save energy. The LEED rating system, good buzzword, LEED rating system, everybody wants to use that. It's a good guideline for how to be sustainable. And finally, building commissioning, which we think is very important. So incorporating sustainability, collaboration with the team starts at the very beginning, early planning. Absolutely define the goals. What is your goal? We want to be a LEED Silver, what that exactly means to a project. Using LEED as a guideline, and here are the things that, the pieces of LEED. LEED is not just the mechanical engineer's responsibility to save energy, but it's a lot of things like water resources, energy and atmosphere, the type of building materials that are used, how close the materials are, where they're coming from. You know, using local materials is a big advantage. And again, the design continuation of building materials, the building position. You know, we want glass and so forth, but don't face the glass right next to where the sun comes in all the time. Has a lot to do with the, sustainability and the consumption. Making a building that is maintenance simple is very important. A building that is difficult to maintain will not be sustainable because it won't be maintained. It won't operate sustainably. Obviously, having a building envelope that's good. A good building envelope that's designed well, but also is built correctly. A very complex architectural envelope that may not be able to be constructed well and so forth really challenges your sustainability. And the need for building commissioning. And I'm going to go through this very quickly, but building commissioning is extremely important for a process if you actually want a sustainable facility. In the LEED rating system, it's a requirement. It's a prerequisite to be for all the energy consuming systems to be commissioned to make sure that they operate correctly. And you get several extra points and so forth for actually doing enhanced commissioning, even at commissioning the envelope. So commissioning is very important, and it brings all of the players, including the owner and all the engineers, architects and so forth, into one group and collaborates with them to make sure they're meeting the same goals. The commissioning process is in 4 phases. It starts at design. And I see a number of times where people have asked buildings to be commissioned and said, well, it's about half built. Can you commission it? Well, you can. But the commissioning process works much better when you have the commissioning agent on board during design to do peer review. Begins with the owner's program requirements, making a commissioning plan, doing peer reviews of the design. They're not the designers, but doing peer review of the design, and finally collaborating with all the different design between the architect, the civil engineer, and the mechanical, electrical engineers. During construction, very important to make sure that the facility is properly built and properly, the submittals are all reviewed, that the functional tests are made of systems. Everything needs to work. I can't tell you how many times I've gone into buildings in the last 30 years that we're doing remodels, especially hospitals, and whatever they put in never did work. It never was right, you know, but nobody had ever tested it. So if you want a sustainable building, you want to make sure that everything works as it was designed. Finally, O&M reviews. Reviewing the O&M manuals to make sure that a building can be maintained, make sure the equipment startup works well, and we have integrated system testing to make sure all the systems and individual systems worked as an integrated and function as they were intended. And finally, during occupancy. We're going to occupy the building. The maintenance people and the operations, the engineers and so forth need to understand how the building works. Making sure that the as-built documents are done. How many build a hospital here that don't think it's ever going to be remodeled or added on to? Okay, as-built documents are critical. And if you don't have somebody to make sure that those are done correctly, commissioning agents responsible for that. And finally, a final report and so forth says, did you actually get what you paid for? So, to sum up, engineering systems are very important. I mean, more than energy, more than water, but all the systems to make sure that they operate correctly and so forth are very, very critical to make sure that you have a sustainable project. It's something you need to plan for.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Lloyd, for this green speech toward green hospital and green building. And the last one is Mr. Steve. He is a principal director for health, and he will talk about optional process improvement in the health facility design. Floor for you.
I've been reminded by our kind host that I am the last speaker that stands between you and your lunch. So I will be brief, and I thank you in advance for your attention and also the honor of coming and speaking with you here today. I am Steve Jacobson. I'm a principal with HKS. HKS is a US-based architectural firm with 1,000 people. We have offices across the world. We've done a lot of work within the Middle East, and most recently across the street at King Fahd Medical City, 200,000 square meters, including Cancer Center, Proton Therapy Center, Neuroscience Institute, Cardiology Center, and Women's Center. So we have a very strong invested interest in working and collaborating with you. And throughout the sessions today, it's been very interesting to understand what are the key issues to be addressed. Earlier this morning, some of the future trends were identified, one of those being operational process improvement. And so this talk is going to take a much deeper dive into lean operational process improvement and how that can be applied within the design process, working with clients. I was glad to hear a question in the first session this morning of how is lean being applied to projects. And so I had a brief discussion with that gentleman who I understand had a PhD in implementation of lean projects and project delivery. What I would say is this talk, there's two real branches. One is focusing on the operations. The other one is focusing on project delivery. We're very much engaged with both, but today's talk will be focused on the operations and, in essence, designing the operations before you begin designing the facility. So we'll do a brief overview of operational process improvement methodology, talk about some of the tools that are used with clients, and then how those have been applied in actual projects. I think you've heard pretty clearly stated what is operational improvement and what are the lean methodologies. It's in essence to understand and analyze the current operations. What is the current state? And then after understanding that current state, what could be the future state based on best practices and based on listening to the stakeholders that operate those processes, and then designing that future state with those stakeholders. It's a pretty basic question. Why would you use or improve healthcare operations? Well, labor is really the greatest cost in delivering healthcare. It's really not the capital related to the building, but it's the labor and the running rate labor to operate that. So by improving the operations, can significantly reduce waste and reduce cost, and also improve the value that is brought to the customer. Healthcare worldwide, particularly in the US, is facing significant challenges. And so the clients that we're working with, the providers of healthcare, are really focused on efficiency, how to improve efficiency. They're focused on value and cost, and they're doing this within limited capital. I think the limited capital component applies anywhere that healthcare is being provided. So what we're focusing on with them is, in fact, the process improvement. What can you do? Get more out of what you have. And what is the return on investment, or improving the return on investment, and also dealing with aging facilities. Much of this process improvement can be done within existing facilities without doing any new construction. So it's an evaluation of how can throughput or utilization be improved within aging facilities, or after evaluation, perhaps it's determined that the aging facilities don't accommodate what's needed and new facilities need to be designed. Who's involved with the process? Lean really focuses on the voice of the customer, or who's using that process, or who receives an output from that process. So we really start with the customer. We then work with the stakeholders, or those that are closest to the process, know the process, understand the process, and thus are in the best position to improve the process. And then we also get buy-in from the owner or the leadership to say, this is a value, we need to do this. So it's really in that order that we work. How do we improve the processes? These are some of the techniques. There's many techniques. There's nothing magic about lean, but it is a discipline. It's something that everyone has to be committed to and buy into. It doesn't begin with design and it doesn't end with design. It's ongoing, it's continuous. So we start by what's called walking in the stakeholder's shoes, and that's really experiencing the process firsthand to understand it. Then it's analyzing what might be broken about that process and understanding the current state of that process through the engagement of the stakeholders, through bringing in best practices, brainstorming, visioning, how could that process be improved, and then using some of the lean methodologies to design a new process. The whole intent is, again, that process is designed and understood, and then as it relates to an architectural project, beginning programming and design from that point. Don't expect you to read this, but this is essentially an outline of how this process might work. The top categories relate to operational process improvement that might be implemented over a series of 5 work sessions, a period of 3 to 5 months. During that time, there's orientation, there's visioning, there's current state mapping, there's future state mapping, and there's a tremendous amount of education of the team throughout that process. As you're working on the operational process improvement, you can then begin the more traditional services of programming and planning and design if it's a project that you're working on. The operational process improvement can be done independent of any project or in combination with a project. Some of the tools that are being used, waste walk. Lean is all about eliminating waste, and so it's going to the place where the process, where the service is being delivered and identifying the waste that occurs and how it could be eliminated. Part of that is charting the 7 healthcare flows: patient flow, family flow, staff flow, meds, supplies, information, equipment, understanding how those go through a department, go through a whole hospital, and finding ways that that flow can be improved. Value stream maps, again, what adds value, what doesn't add value, those things that don't add value, eliminate it. Using root cause analysis to find out when problems occur, what are the real causes of that. And then rapid improvement events. It's really bringing together those stakeholders and in a short period of time identifying what can be changed, getting a commitment to that change, and then going and implementing it. So the waste walk is going out, observing at the place where the process occurs and identifying those non-value-added activities. Those can occur in a host of different areas. Non-utilized resources, transportation is a big one, inventory too much, too little, defects, overproduction. These are just some categories of waste within a process. Then the team prioritizes what to improve. Not everything can be done at one time, but the goal is to choose those things that have the highest impact with the least amount of effort. This is a simple diagram using root cause analysis. In this case, lower exam room utilization and patient throughput. You're not getting the patients through that you want to, so you determine what are the big categories where this problem could occur in personnel. Is it in the process? Is it in the environment? And then you start identifying within each of those major groupings where the problems are occurring. All of this is to get at how do you fix those problems. These are simple cartoon diagrams of workflow analysis in a diagnostic service, kind of the random, illogical, inconvenient pathways. How can those be clarified so that there's more direct pathways? In an emergency department where bottlenecks occurs, delays occur, identifying where those are, changing the process to eliminate those. And then in an invasive procedure area, where does a repetitive or redundant work occur? How can you eliminate that and clarify the process? Again, none of this is difficult other than focusing the attention on the stakeholders to implement the change. Value stream map, again, they start out as very simple diagrams using different colored stickies to identify perhaps the flow of patients, identify the flow of equipment, and how does that all occur in the delivery of the service, and then clarifying how that process can be improved, identify it, have everybody agree and buy into it, and go ahead and implement it. Other tools, 5S. This really is about the discipline, the daily discipline, the ongoing discipline of operations, and it really speaks to cleanliness and orderliness equals productivity and quality. So standardizing, sorting, setting in order, and shine or keeping clean are just part of the daily discipline of process improvement. Rapid improvement events, again, we use on a very regular basis, and the whole intent is in a concentrated period of time, identifying the current state and brainstorming alternatives to fix those things that are broken, developing a vision for what the future state could be, and then start to implement change and testing and trying and debugging until the point where those users of that process agree on the new process and implement it and then celebrate it. That builds confidence and it fuels the continuous improvement process. Some very simple applications. It's very hard for me as an architect not to come up and show you a lot of pretty pictures, but we're utilizing both operational process improvement as well as delivery process improvement at Akron Children's Hospital. So utilization of process maps, value streams maps, we're doing a lot of simulations. Computer simulations were shown earlier today. And then using mock-ups. This picture on the lower part of the screen was the entire emergency department that was mocked up in a warehouse with cardboard. The users came and walked through processes or many processes within the emergency department. Changes were made very quickly, and that all influenced what the final design became. So it's a great example of using a mock-up for process improvement. This is a smaller scale, 20,000 square meter, new ambulatory clinic. In this case, 11 different physician groups were coming together for the first time. And so we worked with them to create standardized clinic layouts, and we tracked the results such that we found we had a common care model that was developed, and through that common care model and standardization, we were able to reduce square footage and increase throughput, thus creating significant savings for this institution. Another much smaller example at Carmanos Cancer Center is an academic medical center. They have no space. There was going to be no new expansion, but the analysis was focused on how did they utilize their existing space to increase throughput and improve the quality of care. Final, just quick example is rather than looking at a hospital or a department, it's really looking at perhaps logistics services that would go across an entire campus. So these would be the components of logistics. These are the customers of logistics. All of the major elements of supply chain that go into a hospital, all the major elements of waste that go out of a hospital, and then applying that, starting from an analysis of the campus to where do the supplies come in, where are they distributed, and then how do they flow back out. Another great example of how operational process improvement can be utilized effectively. Thank you very much for your time and attention.
Thank you, Mr. Steve, for considering the time. Now we'll open the floor for the question. Before we start, I would like to conclude the 4 distinguished speakers for their actually distinguished lectures. The first speaker speaks about the standards, and he tried to give a hint that you have to establish your own standard. And the second one, he moves us from standards into a state-of-art design and the hospital and hospitality, soften the word of hospital into hospitality. The third speakers move into environment and sustainability and how should we look to hospitals as a green building. The last one, Mr. Steve, he speaks about the operating the hospital, and we should consider the operation during the design process. Thank you for the speaker, and now we open the floor for the questions.
Assalamu alaikum jami'an. Thank you for everybody. Thank you for your speakers. So I would like just only my question to Mr. Ron, KJWW. Actually, my engineering background drives me in, you know, whenever you just talk about the sustainability and all these stuffs. So everybody, you know, I couldn't think about any engineer or any designer whenever he designed without thinking sustainable. And everybody knows the sustainability cost or the impact of sustainability design against the cost of the construction. Okay. So my question is this: can we have, if we have a budgeted or allocated budget for a certain projects, can we have sustainable design without having a cost effective? A part of having LEED certificates, if we don't look for a LEED, I know whenever we look for a LEED certifications, that will definitely add in some costs for the construction. However, if you don't think about LEED, can we still have a sustainable design without having an impact on the construction cost?
Absolutely. Absolutely. If you look at two of the most sustainable healthcare facilities we've ever designed, Great River Medical Center in Iowa and Sherman Hospital, both of those are extremely sustainable facilities. It was the owner's requirement. Great River Medical Center was designed before LEED was even invented. And they consume a tremendous amount of less energy than any other facility that we know of. And neither one of them followed LEED. You know, now, I'm not suggesting that you don't need to follow LEED as a guideline, and there are some things in LEED that are good. You know, making sure the building works correctly with commissioning is good. Making sure that you use materials for the building that are low VOCs are good ideas and so forth, but you can certainly be sustainable and very sustainable without following the LEED guidelines and so forth. We're not, I am personally not a proponent of LEED. I'm a LEED accredited professional, I understand it, but the idea of being LEED and LEED for the sake of being LEED, I'm not a proponent of that. You know, I'm not, if that's what the client wants, we certainly could do that, but I'm not a proponent of that. So yes, you can be sustainable without even following the LEED guidelines at all.
Thank you. My question to Henning Dash, we need your recommendation. Is it better to have our own standards, guidelines in Saudi Arabia, or you recommend to have our international guidelines like AIA or the British or American standards? Is it better for each region to have their own guidelines or just to have it internationally?
Yes, it is a very good question you ask. I think, you know, after I've shown a few examples where international standards might not apply in several regions well, and I know that you have developed already your own standards here, right? So you have developed your standards for the prototypes and everything. I'm not very sure, but I think it would be of advantage that every region should have their own standard, but this standard should apply to the overall international standards as well. But I certainly believe that every region, every location is not the same, you know what I mean? And therefore, there is not the overall standard in the world that should apply. It must be individual overall standards, but regional standards must be also there.
Could I just add one point, and that is we're working on a hospital project in Abu Dhabi, and in Abu Dhabi there's a standard of a Pearl rating, which is a sustainable design standard. It has been adopted from LEED, and I think it is much more region sensitive and more appropriate than just applying LEED. So I would concur that there are adjustments that are appropriate. And to answer the first gentleman's question, there may be some costs that are initial costs, but certainly from a life cycle cost perspective, to design to sustainable standards will save money in the long run, and that's been proven.
Okay, thank you. Any more question? If there's a question with the ladies, they can ask their questions. Please, anyone to ask question, raise his hand, at least to direct the question.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. هو ليست سؤال وإنما مداخلة. المهندس حسن السلطان من إدارة العامة للإسكان بوزارة الصحة. المداخلة وهو أنه المطلب الأول والأخير هو المريض في إنشاء المستشفيات. أيضا إنشاء المستشفى كوحدة واحدة، يعني حتى خدماته منها الإسكان، لذلك لابد أن يكون الطبيب مرتاح في سكنه. إذا ارتاح في سكنه توفرت له جميع الأمور في التخطيط في سكنه، الترفيه وغيرها. هنا في ذلك راح يكون ينعكس ذلك على المريض مباشرة، يكون انعكاس على المريض في علاجه. بس هذا بغيت أتداخل.
أي سؤال؟ نختم. يبدو أنكم desperate على الغداء. Okay, we close this session. I will thank all my speakers and all the other ones for this meeting. Thank you.
حقيقة نشكر الدكتور غازي العباسي على إدارة هذه الجلسة، وندعوه لتقديم شهادات شكر للمحاضرين. أول الشهادات لهانس، إنجنير هانس. أوكي. المحاضر الثاني، المحاضرين جيم أتكنز ومحمد أيوب. المحاضر الثالث وهو وارن، مهندس وارن. المحاضر الرابع هو المهندس ستيف. كما نتقدم بالشكر للدكتور غازي العباسي الأمين العام لهيئة المهندسين السعوديين، وشهادة شكر للدكتور غازي من شعبة معماري المباني الصحية. شاكرين للجميع الحضور. ننبه إلى هناك غداء في الصالة المجاورة لهذه الصالة بالنسبة للرجال، وبالنسبة للسيدات في قاعة بجانب القاعة هذه للأخوات السيدات.